The following program was made possible thanks to the generous support of our Kickstarter backers.
Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired.
Sup, Holmes?
Beware, your host, Jonathan Holmes.
Hello, everyone, and happy Mother's Day to the world, because we're all good people, and we all deserve happiness, though today is the day for mothers. And what a fun coincidence, Rebecca, you are one of the founding mothers of modern video game development, at least as far as I've read. I can't believe your resume. It's intense. It's almost scary. I'm almost scared of you, but not quite, because you seem so nice. And what wonderful, look at those headphones. So Rebecca, where did you get your start in video game development?
I got my start in video game development in 1979 when I scrimped and saved, and I bought a used Apple II from some guy near the LA airport because I got out of Penny Saver, and I started programming my Apple II, learning assembly language, and just because I was that curious. At the same time, because I came from a broken childhood, I really spent a lot of my time in video games. And then back then, this was the Atari 2600. So I got really good at a game called Atari Space Invaders. Well, lo and behold, Atari did this contest to see who was the video game champion of the world. It was the very first contest ever of its kind. And I entered the Los Angeles Regional, and I won. And then I went to the Nationals, and I became the first video game champion ever.
Really?
Yeah, it's well documented. Go to like the old classic gamers. I have a whole book of newspaper clippings about this thick.
Oh, I believe you. I hope it didn't sound as though I was incredulous and thinking you were suddenly making that up, because that's not what I was
people, because the trouble is people have short memories. Even though I was on the TV news, I was in Time Magazine, I was in I had my 15 minutes of fame. But because after the video game crash, pretty much all the history before the crash kind of got erased. So the very fact that like some people say, oh, Thresh is the first video game champion. It's like, no, I predate him by at least 5 years. Or in that case, I think it was a decade.
My goodness. Well, these days, the kids all know about, look at those.
These are books I wrote. I was the one who wrote them. There's a guy named Tom Hirschfeld, because I wasn't a very good writer, so I wrote the draft, and he just basically was the ghostwriter who actually did the writing of it. But I was the one who wrote all the notes and everything for these two books.
How to master the video games and how to master home video games, because you had to differentiate back then between home games and arcade games. Huge.
The first book came out was this one, How to Master Popular. And this is Centipede, Tempest, Space Invaders, Pac-Man. Like, even has a little thing of saying, hey, check this out. It even has Pac-Man in it. But then afterwards, the book sold so well, they wanted a sequel. So then that's why we did the home video games, which then focused on like Atari Adventure, Atari Superman, Space Invaders, of course, stuff like that. Because, the Atari 800, sorry, I take back. The Atari 2600, the graphics are really, really primitive compared to what the arcade video games are doing.
Sure.
But during this time, simultaneously, I was flat broke. I mean, I had no money whatsoever. So what money I could scrimp and save, I was buying like little pieces of hardware every now and then, going to hacker groups, and I learned how to copy cartridges. And I designed a card that I could plug into my Apple II, that I could then use it to download cartridges, but at the same time, put them onto its RAM, plug this cable in my Atari 2600, I could play all the games. Well, yes. So what happened then is that I decided to start looking at these ROMs, and I reverse engineered the ROMs to figure out how to program the Atari 2600. And I was actually writing little demos and stuff like that, little color bars and things, things moving around. And I thought, that's really cute, until my editor of Electronic Games Magazine, a guy named Arnie Katz, said, hey, there's people looking for hiring Atari programmers everywhere. And I says, well, I know how to program the Atari. And he's like, you? How? And so I made a little cartridge of just a demo, sent it to him. Within hours, I got a phone call from Eric Dott of the Avalon Hill Game Company. Well, next thing you know, I was working on this.
Whoa! And this is also a audio show for people who can't see it.
Yeah, it's
London Blitz.
Yeah, London Blitz for the Atari 2600. Here's the box, and here's a copy of the cartridge. The books were, for Tom Hirschfeld, but yeah. So worked on London Blitz and Out of Control, and those two games I taught the entire team how to program the Atari 2600.
And you were typing, and how did you program it? What were you writing the code on?
I was using an Apple II at the time, it was a predecessor to the Merlin assembler. I think it was just called Merlin. Or was it Apple Asm? I can't even remember anymore, but it was an Apple II and I made this little card, and I sat there for like a couple of days, with this table where I was building like 7 or 8 of those cards that I did, because that was part of my job, was make these cards, which were then used as dev kits. So everybody had an Apple II. We had little cards plugged in that had a cable going to Atari 2600. You write the code in a 6502 assembler, and then you just upload the ROMs into these cartridges, and there you go. There was no debugger. There was no stuff like that. You just, it better work the first time, or it just didn't work.
Amazing. So was this a rags to riches story? I would hope they were paying you pretty well, because you were doing a lot. No, they were not paying you very well.
Oh, no. I was I now in hindsight, I realize how exploited I was, because you see, I lied about my age. I wasn't even 18 yet. And I was so blissfully ignorant of what my worth was that I was being paid, I think, like $100 a week when I was working at Avalon Hill.
Wow.
I just didn't know what I was worth.
And you weren't through with high school yet. Had you dropped out of high school?
Oh yeah, I dropped out of high school. I don't even have no college, no I did go back to do a GED test, but and I have a GED somewhere, but it's just. But officially, I've never graduated high school.
So you have London Blitz and 2 books that you wrote, and there's a bunch of other stuff you were showing me before the show started, handy. But your GED, I mean, it almost sounds like the career of a child actor who found that they had something so special that they were able to do something huge, to write games that people were going to be playing throughout the country before you even turn 18. How could high school be exciting after that?
Oh, well, high school was miserable for me. I was always being picked on. I was always being the outcast. And of course, my family hated my guts. That's a total other story. I mean, my family was horrible. I'll just put it that way. They were just absolutely horrible. And I ran away from home, and I never looked back.
Wow. And then before you knew it, you're writing Atari 2600 games.
Before I knew I was doing Atari 2600 games. And then I got recruited away to go to Time Warner to work on their play cable system. But then after a few months of that they shut it down. Of course, now they saw the writing on the wall that the market was going to eventually implode, which most companies didn't, but they figured it out. Then I went back because when I was working at Avalon Hill, that was in Towson, Maryland. Went back to LA because I'm an LA girl. And I met up with a hacker friend of mine who told me, hey, there's this company called Boom Corporation. They're hiring. I was like, okay. So I go over there, get paid the equivalent minimum wage, and I start working on converting Atari 2600 games to the VIC-20.
Oh, okay.
So I did a game called Chuck Norris Super Kicks, a game called Robin Hood. They were from Zonix, and I did the VIC-20 versions. And then I did a Commodore 64 version. And then the company, Boom Corporation, shut down because the guy who ran it, Mike Boone, didn't really see a future in software anymore. He wanted to do, of all things, whiteboards. Now, in hindsight, it was the most brilliant thing he did because the guy became a millionaire selling whiteboards. He's like all but the inventor of the whiteboard.
Really? But
I don't
software has done pretty well too since then. I mean,
yeah,
there was room for both.
Yeah, there's room for both, but that's Mike Boone's career. And he was doing a software company. He decided they didn't want to do it anymore, shut it down. We all got laid off. And the names of the people who got laid off was Brian Fargo. That should sound familiar to you. Jay Patel, Troy Worrell, and myself. There were others too, but the four of us. And that's when we said, well, we're unemployed. What do we do? Let's make a video game company. So it's like, okay, let's do that. Interplay was born.
Wow.
And
So-
it was there for 11 and a half years.
Interplay. And what was your first game at Interplay? How did that feel to start that company? What was your opening act, as it were?
Our opening act was basically starving. I mean, it was a startup. We paid us enough money just to pay rent, nothing more. But the first game it was called, it was two games. It was Mind Shadow and Tracer Sanction. They were both graphic text adventures. I wrote the engines for them. I designed the whole, the way the game worked and so forth. And the scripting was done by other people. Iman Adham did one of the games, although he later renamed himself to Alan Adham and was one of the founders of a company called Blizzard.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But Mind Shadow was really a retelling of the Bourne identity. And the Tracer Sanction was just supposed to be like a sci-fi private eye game in which you're just you're supposed to be a tracer and you're supposed to be going around from planet to planet trying to find a bad guy. But what happens, this is what really gave me the idea of writing a shared engine. I wrote one game engine, and then just by changing the scripts, I was able to have two games. And with that, we sold them to Activision, and Activision published them. And it did so well that we did another game, Borrowed Time. And that's when I came with the idea of how to do a point-and-click interface, because that's when we got the Apple II mouse. And so, let's get the Apple II mouse, let's put a point-and-click interface. So this actually predated the Lucasfilm stuff.
Wow.
So you actually see something. Now, it's granted, the characters don't walk around. It's still a graphic text adventure, but at least you click on things. Right.
You click on some images. You just don't have a character on screen moving about. We had David Fox, who was the third ever employee of LucasArts on the show, and I get excited when I talk to people such as yourself and such as David. Said, you invented this, and he was like, nope, I didn't invent it. Other people worked on it first, but we did evolve it. And he was talking, whether he knew it or not, he was talking about you. Did you have a sense of what you were dealing with here? Did you think, wow, I'm creating porting systems, I'm creating engines that can be used for multiple games, and I'm creating an interface, this point-and-click game interface that is going to set standards that will be used 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 years forward? I mean, they're still using them now.
No, when I was creating them, I just simply was saying, I want a game I want to play. That's really my entire mindset. Was like, before we did Mind Shadow Section, I love playing games like Wizards and the Princess, Missions Asteroid, those kind of games. So I thought I would like to make a game like that. So I did not invent the graphic text adventure. That would have to be either the Sierra people. I think it was also a Penguin Software also did those types of games. So I didn't invent it, but I did my own.
Right.
And I prided myself on the fact that my graphic routine, the fill routines, was like 3 times faster than everyone else's. So like when you went from room to room, it was like almost instantaneous. Where if you played the other competing games, they were much, much slower. So it's like, yes, I got it. I did it, but I did it better. But then when I was doing Borrowed Time, I had a bunch of complaints from the artist. His name's David Lowery, and he was saying that he didn't really like drawing art by doing the pencil lines and stuff like that. He wanted to have more freedom. So then that's why when I was doing Borrowed Time, we made a compromise where the art was going to be smaller, but I was actually going to save the bitmaps. And I then worked really hard to come up with compression algorithms in order to be able to fit all those pieces of art. So I came up with an algorithm to do what was called XOR preprocessing, which is you take one line of art, you exclusive OR it with the second line, and what the point is, if the lines are the same, what you get is all zeros or a specific pattern. So no matter what it is, as long as it's changes in a specific thing, you get the same pattern, which then when you run it through zip or any other equivalent compressor, it shrinks it down really small. So by doing a 2-pass compression, I was able to basically triple the amount of pieces of art I could put on a disc. And this is something that I was able to use as well as on Bard's Tale and Wasteland, because that's how those games had so much art on the disc, was my compression algorithm.
Huh. And did you have other compression algorithms to turn to?
No, I invented it.
It's more than any other guest we've had on the show thus far, and we've had some great guests like David I was talking about, Ron Gilbert, Jane Jensen. It's sounding like you were there during this Wild West period of not only game development, but just computer programming in general. There was no internet people could just turn to and say, what's the best compression? You had to sit there before the unknown, no assurance that you were going to be able to do it, having to take all of these risks with your time, with your life, with your money, with your future, and say, can I do it? Can I create this? And then you did. Thank goodness. Not everybody did, but you managed to do it.
Yeah, and one thing that made me eminently qualified to do this stuff was because of all my hardware hacking in my much younger years. I know the hardware down to the chip level. So therefore, it's like, okay, when I'm writing disk drivers, well, I know exactly how the disk drives work. I know how the currents work, how the timing works, how everything works. So when I was doing stuff on the 1541, a fast loader, I was able to time it to download the data from the 1541 drive into this Commodore 64 while taking into account the sprites as they were. When you have a video display turned on the Commodore, the DMA channel would actually use up CPU cycles to draw the sprites.
Okay.
The problem is that it would actually slow down the CPU at times. So your code would just run at a certain speed and stop and then execute, but you wouldn't know this. So if you were writing code that would read data from the 1541 drive very tightly timed, that DMA would interfere with it. So I actually had code in my 1541 driver that waited until vertical blank. Then when vertical blank hit, then I told the 1541, give me a sector of data, and it would come in the entire vertical blank section. So I was able to get the entire sector of data in one frame of video without turning the video off.
Whoa. I mean, to say that most folks probably don't even understand what you're talking about, let alone being able to figure out how to know kind of almost the psychology of how these computers are going to think when they're going to decide to think in what way and know it enough to plan your code accordingly. Good grief. And this is this why Bard's Tale 3 ran so well for me back in the day, which was an Electronic Arts game.
Yeah, Electronic Arts published it. It was written over when I was at Interplay. So technically the game itself belonged. Now, granted, over the years the code's reverted to me, so now I own the code again, which is how I was able to do the Bard's Tale Remastered. But the trademark and stuff belongs to Electronic Arts. Same with the trademark to Wasteland. That's another story.
Really? So, you know, we don't have to get into it if you don't like, but working with Electronic Arts on trademark things, how has that been?
Well, see, that actually has nothing to do with really Electronic Arts per se. It's the industry. We had the same problem with Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, Borrowed Time, and Task Times, and Tone Town. Even today, this really hasn't changed much. You're a developer. You have a great idea for a game. You've already put together a prototype. So now you've got this demo. It looks really, really good, but you don't have the money to finish the game because it does cost a lot of money to make a game. And the money is because, you know, we've got to pay rent.
Sure.
You go up to a publisher and you say, hey, publisher, I've got XYZ game. It's a really great game. Publisher looks at it and says, no problem. We will give you the money to finish the game. But in exchange, we own the game. So therefore, that's the deals we signed back in those days. Interplay, when we signed up Mind Shadow, the trademark belongs to Activision. So technically, Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, Borrowed Time, Task Times, and Tone Town, even though they were all written by Interplay Productions, or written by me actually, their trademarks belonged to Activision. Then when Bard's Tale was being written, which was done by originally Michael Cranford, Michael Cranford licensed it to Interplay, who in turn sold it to Electronic Arts.
Uh-huh.
And Electronic Arts gave some checks, large checks to Interplay to have us fund the finishing of Bard's Tale. They also did the same for Wasteland.
Mm.
And Bard's Tale 1 and 2, and also Bard's Tale 3, we got checks, advances on royalties. And then when the games shipped, we got royalties on them. Mm. The only problem, though, is that technically those games' IPs belong to Electronic Arts.
Sure.
Then around 1988, we had made enough money from the profits of Bard's Tale Trilogy and Wasteland that we were able to actually afford doing our own games.
Huh.
We had this idea of doing a movie tie-in, and then that movie game was going to make us all this money because we did a game based on a movie, and that movie was called Neuromancer.
Neuromancer.
And it was supposed to be directed by Ridley Scott. It was supposed to be starring Mel Gibson as Case. It had all this stuff. I mean, I saw the pre-production films. There was a guy named Timothy Leary, who was like one of the Timothy Leary.
Uh-huh.
He was one of the financing people of the film. He called himself Cabana Boys Productions. He actually came by the office a couple of times, and there's stories about him. But like Hollywood, many of these projects, they just go into development hell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened here. Something happened with it where they had the investors of the film started fighting amongst each other, scheduling conflicts and stuff like that, and it imploded,
Mm-hmm.
which is why the film Neuromancer was never made.
Mm.
Unfortunately, we had already signed a deal to do a game based on the film.
And that was you getting the rights to do it, or were they paying you to do it
So
with
we
them?
paid them the rights
Oh, boy.
to use it. And, here's the box of the game.
Whoa.
And it's called Neuromancer. We had Devo. I actually went down to Devo Studios and worked on it with a song called Some Things Never Change. And that was going to be the theme song both to the film as well as the game. I actually digitized parts of the song and put it into the Commodore 64 and Apple II versions.
Cool.
But
Yes.
But unfortunately for us is that, by it not being a movie tie-in, we then just simply renamed it saying it's based on the book, but there was a thing in there that was because we were contractually obligated that states on the back of the thing saying, soon to be a major motion picture. Let's see, where did it say here? Yeah, soon to be a major motion picture from Cabana Boy Productions. I'm actually reading it from the back of the box.
So Timothy Leary, a visionary, icon, maybe not the best business partner, as it turns out.
Well, he was not. It didn't really matter because his business was Interplay. It was really his business with the other film people, because Interplay was not involved in the film.
Right.
All we were involved with was just doing a video game based on the film.
Sure.
It's just that Timothy Leary and his partners, whatever.
Well, now I'm filled with fear that this sunk you, and I know it didn't really sink you.
This is the hilarious thing.
Yeah.
We were also working on what we considered our B title, the B side.
Yeah.
It was a game called Battle Chess. We thought, hey, let's go ahead and now Battle Chess was actually inspired not by Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
It was inspired by the film Future World.
I'm not familiar with that film. What? Tell me more about it.
There was a film called Westworld,
Mm-hmm.
in which it's a music park where you shoot the robots and the robots came. They did a sequel to it called Future World. Same kind of story. The robots are trying to take over the world, kind of thing. But in Future World, there was a scene in which two people were at a table and they were playing live action chess, in which there was this hologram on the table, and inside the hologram, it was an actual room of these robots, basically people, dressed up as chess pieces, and they were, doing their moves and shooting each other. So for now, there was no humor in it. They just simply did the moves and fell over.
Sure.
But that was like, wouldn't it be cool if we can actually do that as a video game?
Mm-hmm.
And then we added the humor to it. And we thought, hey, we might sell maybe 50,000, 100,000 copies of this game. It's kind of cute. It's just a chess game, so really nobody's going to care for it. So, we had Jay Patel and I forgot who else. Mike Quarles over there. They were working on that. I was working on the Neuromancer game, but I also did some stuff on Battle Chess. Mm-hmm. But the thing was that when the two games shipped, we thought Neuromancer was going to make us a ton of money, Battle Chess a little bit. Mm-hmm. It was the other way around. Neuromancer sold okay. Battle Chess, we needed bulldozers to bring in the money. That game was such an unabashed runaway hit that was like, everybody at Interplay was like, I don't believe this. People love Battle Chess.
I certainly did. It's because chess, wonderful game, of course. It's been around for forever. But it doesn't give you a lot visually. Battle Chess filled in all those blanks and had passion. It was a way to get other people's passion for the game and to get more feeling from what can be kind of just like a math equation, but it's a competitive math equation. Instead, it gave you all this feeling, and you felt like you were on the cusp of like this new generation of video games where they were like classy, because of course chess, totally classy, played by kings and queens throughout history, but also like this is the future, and you grasped onto that, and it was a huge hit. What a relief. Whereas Neuromancer, why do you think Neuromancer didn't end up doing as well as you had hoped?
Well, one thing is that at the time, William Gibson wasn't really well known for his books and so forth. Now, he did have a cult following. He was popular and sold really well, but this is 1989, and Cyberpunk really hadn't taken off yet. There were things like Blade Runner and stuff like that was around, which is why people were looking at Neuromancer. But the thing is that doing a game based on just a book, it really doesn't do very well. Now, if the movie had come out, it would have been a completely different story, because the thing is that we didn't really have that much of an ad budget. So while we did do some ads here and there for Neuromancer, but once Battle Chess started selling like crazy, we just switched our focus and started, okay, we're just going to advertise Battle Chess and so forth, because hell,
Sure, that's where the money's at.
That's where the money is.
And it's a fun project too.
And of course, we held out hope that they were actually going to do the movie, but that never panned out.
Sure. You put it even on the box. You made promises on Timothy Leary's behalf about what Mel Gibson was going to do with his life. And no fault of your own, it did not happen. I'm very curious about how the game plays, though. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
It's basically like one of those, it plays almost exactly like one of those LucasArts point-and-click adventures. You have a character click case, and you move them around, and you go from place to place and interact with people, get items. It literally is a point-and-click adventure.
Cool. I love that. It's one of my favorite genres. I wonder how that would do now. Is that one you sought potentially getting the rights to in order to re-release on?
That is something I have contemplated. It's just one where that, unfortunately for me, is I just don't have the kind of money to be able to do such a game, because, the graphic standards have moved up from 8-bit little pixel art to stuff like, today people would expect either at least a level of quality of the remastered LucasArts games.
Oh, sure.
That's the minimum bar that we could possibly do. And even that, you've seen how much Double Fine had to pay to do those games. We're talking millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we would need essentially millions of dollars just to do it right.
Do you have the rights to it now, or would you have to pay for those rights?
I would have to go to William Gibson and buy the rights to him from his book.
Oh, geez. So that too.
Yeah. Well, it's his book. So.
Yeah, it's only fair. Absolutely. I think it was not that long ago that the game adaptation of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which I think is Ray Bradbury.
Yes, that's Ray Bradbury's game.
Yeah.
Ray Bradbury's I don't think he's alive. I think he just had to work with his estate.
I think he's just barely alive. I think he's just barely hanging on.
Mostly dead. No, he's not all dead.
Oh, Harlan Ellison. My mistake.
Harlan. Okay. I stand corrected. Harlan Ellison.
Yeah,
I think he is quite alive.
Yeah. But that game was recently re-released, I think, on Steam and GOG. And there's this new audience of people whom sometimes they're 15, 16, 17. You may be able to relate with them because at that age you were digging into whatever you could find to build this skill and to put your mind into this other world. That was so occupying. It sounds like there was kind of an endless level you could learn, an endless level you could experiment with. So it to this day, it sounds like you're still fascinated with it. There's kids like that today who not only want to explore what technology has now, but are so interested in the history. Like we're just now on the cusp of this new generation of kids who see video games the way we grew up with movies, thinking, oh, yeah, I'm interested in how they made movies in the 30s and 40s, and I might end up thinking Charlie Chaplin is funnier than Chevy Chase. There are people who may end up thinking that your work is far more compelling, far more interesting, and digging into exactly how you made it than what Cliffy B is doing. I don't know if you know who that is. He makes it.
Oh, I know Cliffy B. I worked with him on a game called Jazz Jackrabbit 2.
What? You worked with Cliff Blazinski?
Yeah, and Arjen Brousset. In fact, we're trying to work with him right now, bringing back Jazz Jackrabbit. But
that's pretty exciting. Yeah. I don't know if people know that. That could even be a headline.
People don't know that. And the trouble is that we've been talking Epic Games for years about this. It's just been slogging along. Who knows? Who knows if it ever goes anywhere? I mean, we've been talking with them for about at least 5 years about it. I mean, there's several properties I've been trying to resurrect for many, many years, but some of them are also in development hell. In some cases, the IP holder just won't negotiate in good faith. And so it's like, yeah, I would do the game in a heartbeat. However, though, I'm not going to sign a deal which basically gives half my money to an IP holder, and they don't have to do anything. It's just not financially realistic.
Sure.
Other IP holders just flat out say, no, we are not interested in licensing this IP out no matter what. And I'm like, but you're not doing anything with it. Like, nope, I'm just not interested. So
yeah, I think it was all of 2 weeks ago I was talking to Ron Gilbert about that and how Disney owns so much of his IP because they bought LucasArts, and he's got his hands tied. His new game, Thimbleweed Park, he told me he did put a mansion in it that's a little maniac, and there's some, kooky characters in there. So he's trying to find workarounds. But it must be very frustrating to have put this much time, passion, energy, risk out to create these things, and then they're held on to by folks who just see them as at the very best, something that they find value in financially. At very worst, it's just words on a piece of paper with dollar signs next to it, and all of the
it's extremely frustrating because there's two franchises I created. I mean, I did Bard's Tale 3. I mean, I created that game.
Yeah.
Bard's Tale 1 and 2, they were originally created by Cranford, but I took the games onto their other platforms, and like the version that's on the Apple II, which Cranford did, is only. It's just a pale compared to what the version I did on the Apple II GS, and that's the one everybody remembers. But that's the one I did, and then that's the one that used that engine to do Bard's Tale 2, and then afterwards, from that technology, was how Bard's Tale 3 was created. So Bard's Tale 3 has absolutely nothing to do with the original Cranford versions of Bard's Tale. It has nothing. Absolutely zero, which is why the game was so much bigger, so much more graphically intense, and so forth. And then when I was working on Bard's Tale 4, we ended up being told by Electronic Arts to go screw yourself, and that's why I had to rename it to Dragon Wars. And Dragon Wars got shipped, and it too, if you look at it, it's Bard's Tale 4 because it's got giant windows, bigger graphics, all these new improvements and stuff like that, because again, I redid the engine and so forth. But at this point in time, I ended up being moved to do stuff at MacPlay and doing all these ports because it was just so much more profitable for me just to churn out titles. I mean, I've worked on over 250 titles in my career because I was just every couple of weeks, I churned out on a Mac port, another Mac port, another Mac port, and which of course made Interplay a bunch of money, but it got me away from the games I really was passionate about.
Sure.
And now, of course, what's frustrating is Dragon Wars is trademark of Interplay Productions, and Bard's Tale, despite all these years of me trying to get the rights, it ends up already in exile. So it's like, shit. But
how did Dragon Wars sell? I'm hoping it did well even without the Bard's Tale name, because as you're saying, the Bard's Tale games, the first two, originated from the same person. But by 3, like Bard's Tale 3 felt like a completely different entity. I wasn't super interested, honestly, at the time with the first two Bard's Tales when they first came out. But Bard's Tale 3, I was completely enraptured with. I could not get enough of it. You couldn't tear me away from it. It felt as though the things were truly endless. I never felt like no matter how much time I put into it that I would ever see it all. So I was constantly curious about what I would see next. And I was, at that time, just having the budding sparks of potentially wanting to be an artist myself. I would just stare at the art and the animations and wonder at how you managed to cram all of those on that disc and wonder how I could do it.
That was one of my inventions. In fact, that was the animation technology was originally designed for Mind Shadow. It was perfected in borrowed time. And I did change very, very little when we went to Bard's Tale. Actually, I did one thing to it to Bard's Tale and Wasteland because it's the same technology. And then the only thing I did to improve was in Dragon Wars. But the technology was this. You had a main image of whatever the art was. And it was done with that XOR compression scheme. So it took very little space on disk to make that initial image. Then I had up to 4 GIF-style animations. They were completely independent of each other. So I would sit with the artists and tell them exactly how to maximize this technology. And the way it would work is this. You would see a picture of a sorcerer. He has one arm above his head. He has the other hand in front of him, and he had the hair and the eyes. What the artist would do is this hand is one animation. Now, when you do this animation, you will notice that it's not touching the face or the other arm. Because that region of the screen, the artist would only animate in that area. Then he would do another animation of just the eyes blinking. And he would just, the animation would be like about 15, 20 seconds long. But then the other animation is the arm would come down and then go back up, go down. And that animation might be only 5 seconds long. And then the hair would be another animation of the hair moving in the breeze. And that might be a 30-second animation. Because each animation is completely different. They're all different timings. So when you combine the 4, the animation looks like it is totally random. It's not. It's smoke and mirrors. But because of this, I was able to get all this animation in there because the animation was done with XOR, which the technique is very simple. Is in exclusive OR mathematics, it's A exclusive OR with B equals C. But if you take C exclusive OR with B, it equals A. In other words, if you take a value, exclusive OR A with this value, you get C. Use that same value, you get it back again. So what if you took a piece of data to change frame A to frame B? That data, you exclusive OR, the frame will do 1 frame of animation. But if you play that very same data again, it changes the frame back to the way it was. So with this technique, if a person did an animation in which the arm would go up, I would do 1 or 2 frames for the arm to go up. I play that same information with backwards, it puts the arm back down. But I don't have any new data. It's the same data. This is how I was able to get the maximum amount of animation on so little data. And this is something that I created back with originally Mind Shadow for the compression, and then I use it for animation and so forth and so on. And then, of course, with Dragon Wars, the only difference there is I actually locked out one color and I masked this entire image onto the screen. So therefore, you would have the maze on the screen, and then you have this animated character who's animated, moving around, but he's masked against the background. You can actually see the stuff behind him. Which is something I could only do when I got up to the Apple II version of Dragon Wars, only because that's when I had double high-res graphics and I had enough memory to be able to store the background buffer in order to do all this stuff. But it was just, things were just evolving all this time.
People have to remember that at this point, you're working on computers that, they cost $300, $400, and this is 80s economy back when gas cost.
Well, remember, Apple IIs were $1,500.
Oh, my mistake. I was thinking of the Commodore 64. I bought one of those myself. Those were, I think it was 200 for the disk drive and then 200 for the CPU, which was also a keyboard. But yeah, Apple II is $1,500. This is 80s money. This is when gas was 50 cents a gallon. And to have to keep, and these are computers that, geez, we have calculators now that probably have as much processing power. So you were dealing with these hugely expensive, but still so limited things, trying to squeeze out as much efficiency and power from them as you could, while trying to keep up with what the next thing is going to be. I don't know if our industry has ever had a time like that, or if it will ever come again, where things are expanding that quickly with that much uncertainty, but also that much potential at the same time.
No, those so-called glory days are over, because back then the development tools were so primitive, and the operating system was so primitive and so forth, that unless you actually could understand how a computer worked, unless you are a computer programmer at heart, you really couldn't even do anything with the computer beyond just running a word processor. Because there were people like accountants and writers who would just open up their Apple IIs and either go straight into Excel, or they would go straight into AppleWorks, and that's the limit of their use of the computer. But if you want to do anything else, just learning how to, do the version of ProDOS, their version of DOS, it required you to do a little bit of programming, such as like, how many people would understand B-run file, comma, $800? Okay,
Commodore 64.
Mom would have gone,
That's right. That's right. So the days where only those who had this true passion, like, I hate to sound elitist or class oriented, but it's just a fact. Your colleagues back then weren't people whom were like, I kind of like video games, maybe I'll make them. Or, oh, I saw a documentary about people who got rich making video games, I'll do it. It was only people who were willing to dig into it that deeply for the true love of it that ended up where you were. And that caused you to turn out, to create a caliber of content that you maybe don't see these days in quite the same way. Of course, the budgets are bigger than ever, but sometimes wonder if mainstream video games, if the passion is as big as ever, or whether it's become too corporate for that.
For me, in my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, if all the games being churned out by the big corporations are just what you said, the passion's gone. They're just making movies on discs. They're just making commercially safe project. I mean, like Uncharted 4 or Call of Duty 500.
Sure.
They're still fun to play for the audiences they're targeted for. I mean, I'm not knocking the games. They have their place.
Sure, and they're very well made. They get the best craftsmen in the business to work on them. But in terms of that spark of unpredictability, that sense that this is made by someone who is making a game purely for themselves.
Yeah,
like
that is the indie scene.
Mm-hmm.
The indie scene is where you'll find that, because when I go to several of the indie developer conferences and so forth and see some of the stuff that they do, is like going, I never knew you could make a game out of that, and just some of the brilliance. But we're right now in a, how to say it, the precursor to yet another crash. And this is, again, one of my fears, only because we just have way too many good games. There's only so much money in the whole world that's allocated to buy video games.
Sure.
And then when you have companies like Electronic Arts and Activision scooping up a lion's share, that doesn't leave you with much left to divide among all the indie developers. And there's hardly a day goes by when I haven't heard about another indie or small developer going out of business, or of an indie developer who finished a game, got it up on Steam and released their Kickstarter or whatever, but they got the game done, and then they all have to get jobs because they don't have, there's almost no sales.
Yeah. And these are games that are oftentimes interesting, fun, well made, but they don't,
or even critically acclaimed.
Yeah, true. I don't know if you have a one in mind. I'm super curious, but I don't know.
There's one, That Dragon Cancer.
Oh, of course. I was just thinking about that the other day.
There was a whole article recently about how the developers basically didn't make any money on it.
Yeah, and they worked on that for 4 years. It was about, of course, a tragedy, as people know, an autobiographical story about love and hope and pain based on the real life and death of the creator of the game, his son, who passed away from cancer.
Yeah.
If a game like that, which is talked about in the New York Times and every video game magazine, everybody's talked about it, everybody knows about it, and they've made, I can't remember the last numbers I read, it's like 18,000 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
We see, I go with the idea of something that exists right now as one of the biggest symptoms of what I believe is the problem, which is too many games. An example is this. Almost everybody with the Steam account has half a dozen to several dozen games they have purchased but have never played.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is that when the Steam summer sales come along, you buy a bunch of games for $1, $2, whatever, because there's so many of them. Many of these are really, really good games. The problem is that now you have this whole backlog of games. So that therefore it's like, oh, I'm busy playing my XYZ game, which is I'm just what I'm occupying my time with. But when I finally get bored of it, I'm just going to play one of my games from my collection.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, there is no incentive whatsoever for me to go onto Steam to look for the indie games that are currently on sale for $19.95. They're full price, or $29.95 or higher. And especially with, which is something that politics are going on right now, is that there's so many people out there who are barely making a living anyways because minimum wage sucks so bad.
It sure does.
So when you're trying to just make a rent, how in the hell are you going to spend $59.95 on a video game?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
when you have 20 that you already purchased for $1 waiting for you, how can you make that decision? Mm-hmm.
And because you have this plethora of games to occupy your time, you could easily wait to the next summer sale or the next winter sale. And because of this, as an indie developer, I have to factor that in when I release a game. Mm-hmm. I have to say, okay, I have my game, it's ready. I'm going to release it at a time between the summer sales and between the sales. Then I go ahead and sell for $19.95, and I'm only going to sell maybe a couple thousand copies or something like that, only because it's really hard unless I have, nationwide press coverage of some kind to sell any more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Then, after a few months go by, then the sale hits, and probably by then I'm going to get the big wad of cash. However, the big wad of cash by $50,000 to $100,000, which for a indie developer is a lot, but for a mainstream publisher, that's peanuts.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But the issue now is that I've got all these people now who own my game, but I only got 10 cents to 50 cents per copy.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, of them, maybe only 10 to 20% actually play the game that they bought.
Because it ends up in their backlog. They get distracted.
So then how am I going to get DLC sales if they're not even going to play the game?
It makes me wonder, of course, where things are going and how people are going to stay afloat. And this is something that's been on my mind for a while, as it clearly has been yours for much more hands-on reasons. For me, it's more just something to think about. And I care about people who make games, and I care about games, but it's not my actual life on the line, whether a game sells or not. It seems like it's all about how do you capture people's attention for long enough to get them to, and not only their attention, but their excitement. And where does excitement come from these days? It doesn't necessarily come from budget. It doesn't come from graphics. It comes from somewhere else, and it seems so hard to guess where it's going to come from. Some recent huge hits like Undertale, Stardew Valley, I think people expected those to maybe do okay in a niche, but they managed to get people so excited about them that they talk about them all the time, and they bought them and they told their friends to buy them, and that's where the excitement seemed to come from other people, from their peers. But how do you make sure that happens with your game, which could be just as good as Stardew Valley or Undertale, but how are people going to find it and then get excited enough about it to talk about it? How do you do that?
If you knew, or if anybody knew that, they would be billionaires. I'll tell you that right now. If somebody could figure out what is that magic formula that will make something go viral, then you've just effectively won the internet lottery. It's one where the right place at the right time with the right product and juju happens. Because like Undertale, I played Undertale. I didn't really care for it. But Everybody
Barksdale
else
3
did, and so
like that. It's different when you made Bardsdale 3. Like your standards are higher, maybe. When you made like the quintessential dungeon crawling, management, first person, like, yeah. To you, Undertale is going to look kind of different, I think.
Yeah, see, like Undertale, I don't want to do any spoilers, but when I looked at the story of Undertale and how sad it was and so forth, I said, that's not really a story I want. When I play a game, I don't want a story like that.
Uh-huh.
Granted, a lot of people did, so hence, obviously, what I want is different from what other people wanted. But like for me, the games that we're working on, Shredded Worlds, it's a huge, grandiose story that when you play the game, you only glimpse at the backstory, but we have this gigantic world written behind it and all the stuff. So as you play the game, you will see hints of the backstory, but we don't explain it. It's just there. And it really helps tell the story and immerse you in the world. Because like you were talking about Bardsdale 3, I'm a staunch advocate of making the game feel like you are part of a world. The world is bigger than what you see. And like with both Bardsdale 3 and Dragon Wars, the stories behind them, there's a lot of backstory that I've written that's in those games that's not actually in the game, but it's part of the story. So when characters interact, they interact in a specific way. You may not understand why, but if you have the backstories, you will know why this person hates this person or why this person really always goes out of the way to help that person. But you just see that as a personality quirk, but there really is a story behind them. And because of this, it helps raise the bar of what people expect in a game, because it's good writing really does help create a great world. But back to what I was just talking about, with Bardsdale 3, the game was still, even though it had an open world-ish feel to it, it was designed in a way to make it more linear, because you can only go to certain worlds after you solve a quest in that world, then it unlocks the next world, unlocks the next world. Even though once you unlock a world, you could still go back to the other worlds at any time. In fact, some of the puzzles were that you had to go back to one of the other worlds to do another quest that didn't exist before. Sure. With Dragon Wars, when you start the game, your party's knocked into prison, you're buck naked, and you're like, okay, you're starting off at the beginning, but there's 7 different ways to escape from the prison.
I didn't realize that.
And each different way goes to a completely different quest. Whoa. To go to get to the mainland. Of course, one of the quests is just get strong enough to beat up the guards and walk out the front door. In that case, you did the shortcut. You're right there in the main world already. But one of them is you hide in the garbage bags and they chuck you over the wall. And if your characters all have swim skills, you survive. If you don't have swim skill in the whole party, then you drown.
And for refresh my memory, swim skill comes from a random roll of the die?
No. Dragon Wars uses a skill-based system in which what you do is I just give you skill points and you allocate them as however you want.
Right. Yeah.
Because Bardsdale was originally based on D&D, which is a class-based type of RPG type game. So you start off by saying, I'm a paladin, I'm a thief, I'm a warrior, whatever, and you get certain base skills, and then we randomly add you some skills, so you roll up your character. Well, after doing that in Bardsdale 3, I realized this is stupid. Because all people are going to do is just hit the space bar 25 times until they get all 18s or something like that. And at that point, I said, you know what? I'm just going to save you the trouble. Here's a pre-roll character, but then here's extra points, character with hard-coded stats. You can't change the stats when I'm giving you the character, but then I give you extra points. You allocate the way you want it. And had
that ever been done before? This is standard now, but I don't remember ever seeing that.
I think we did that with Wasteland.
Oh, okay.
I think Wasteland had that too because it was it was all based on GURPS for Wasteland. Originally, it was GURPS. We had to change it to something else because we lost the GURPS license. But I like that kind of system, in which is one where that you create the character, but then you allocate it. And because I didn't have any classes in Dragon Wars, I took that completely out. I then said, you make these characters the way you want them. So if you want your characters to all be swimmers, allocate 1 point of swim skill to everybody. But you pick out, okay, I want this character to technically be my warrior. So I'm going to buff them up with strength, buff them with hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that. But Nobody says you couldn't add to them magic spells. So, okay, give them some magic using. So now you've got a warrior who can cast magic. It's really, I was a staunch advocate of, these are your characters. So I'm not going to I'm going to do everything I can to put no restrictions on how you do these characters. Heck, I was one of the people who, when I took over the Bard's Tale franchise, one of the first things I did was added female characters. Because Cranford flat out said, women don't play these games. And that's why Bard's Tale 1 and 2 for the Apple II had no female anything. Everybody was male.
Really?
And I was arguing with him about that. He's like, nope. Women don't play these games. And I'm like, who are you talking to?
Well, and it didn't sound like he was very interested in changing that either. Like
no. If he was still in charge of the franchise, he would get rid of women again.
Really?
I mean, now, of course, in hindsight, it makes sense because since after leaving Interplay, he never was really part of Interplay. He was more like a contractor kind of thing. Okay. He went and did his own things, but then he went into theology.
Oh.
So
okay.
I don't know if he's a priest or something like that. So some of that comes into play as well.
Sure. Well, there is a lot of talk about, is this industry sexist? I just got back from PAX East 2 weeks ago, and the ratio there was still very low. Women were far outnumbered by men. Most of the games were starring men. It seems to me that it's changed in the limited time I've been around to look at it happen. There are much more women than there probably would have been 5 or 6 years ago, and more games about women. But then there's this other side, folks saying, well, video games have never been sexist. The industry has never been sexist. Women just don't like them, just the way men don't tend to like romance novels. So, like, don't try to force people to like things that... I try to respect every argument, but I can't help but just auto disagree when people tell me that. And I wait for them to, like, give me their data, give me their reasons. And it almost always ends up being self-serving. It almost is always about, like, well, I didn't want to face the fact that, I'm a part of something that's kind of structurally built on things that had sexism in the DNA. And I don't really want to deal with that. I don't want to think of myself as even close to sexist in any way. So I'm just going to decide I'm not. And no one is. Hooray. That's the reality I want.
Well, the reality is that, and this happens, and this is not just in video games. This could be applied to a lot of things, like basic race relations and pure religion and so forth. It's one where if you are benefiting from privilege, you don't recognize it. You don't see it because you don't see every day the discrimination, the glass ceiling. Because you don't see these things, you can't accept or even know that it's there. And in many cases, you are benefiting from privileges that you aren't aware of. And so therefore you just assume it's the status quo.
And you look at anyone who's saying it's not as someone who's just trying to manipulate, to lie in order to get ahead. I see so much of that.
Exactly. And also many people create their own biases, saying like a certain sex or ethnic group or whatever is not as intelligent or not interested in something because you don't see it around. Like an example, you walk around the halls of PAX, you see mostly men. Some people could easily draw the conclusion that women aren't interested in video games because not many women are showing up. But that's not true. Many women don't go to the video game conventions because either A, they're just not into the conventions, or they don't want to go get groped, or they don't want to get picked on. They don't want to, because unfortunately, what was it? There are many times, there are articles out there in which a man would create a dating profile as a woman. But he's not a woman at all. He's just doing this as an experiment. Because he puts up his male profile and he gets no responses whatsoever. He sends messages to girls saying, hey, hi there, trying to be a gentleman about this. And he hardly gets any responses and no women contacts him at all. So he thinks like, oh, let's see what it's like for a woman. Within minutes of putting up a profile, he starts getting all these men propositioning her, including very inappropriate text. And he says like, oh my God, is this what it's like for a woman? And he would ask some women, and everyone was like, yep, that's what it's like. That's what it's like. And it's like, I never knew. Yeah, which is one reason why, oh, well, now I kind of understand why some women have a very, very poor opinion of men.
In my limited experience with some of the larger events about sexism and people attacking each other over this sort of thing, just when I've said something positive about women who have become targets, video game developers who are women who have become targets, I get a fraction of the garbage they get thrown at them just for saying something nice about them. I can only imagine what it's like to be there.
It's absolutely horrible. I mean, there are some women out there who go out and talk, and then the Gamergaters, or just some people in general would just start saying things, but the worst ones is when they go doxing, or they go ahead and send out threats.
Stealing identities, stealing people's bank account numbers, that sort of thing.
Now ask yourself this: how often do these people do that to a man?
They didn't do it to me until I said something in defense of one of the people they were after, and it's always been women. They don't care about the men. It doesn't seem.
And it's just, to me, it's really more of just insecurity, because it's not like there's somehow a woman is going to actually take away their games. It's not going to happen. Like, an example is most women. Now, of course, you can never say all fill in the blank.
Oh, sure.
Everything's always some or most, but you can never stereotype everybody. But most women, at least I'm going to speak for myself. I'm just going to phrase it here. Speaking for myself, when I design a game, I want it to be inclusive. Therefore, like in the games I design, in addition to having non-violent paths where you can just talk your way through things or negotiate your way through things, which is like a lot of women like to do when they play a game. They like to socialize, interact. I also have every single solution can be solved by a very sharp blade. So if you want to be a Conan the Barbarian, and whose entire vocabulary is ugh, and kill everything and win the game, you know what? By all means, here, have a +10 sword, have at. But I am not going to stop you from it. I'm going to say, hey, I'm not going to make a game ever that's going to say, you know what? If you want to go ahead and machine gun down everybody, go ahead. But if you want to actually play in a different style, go ahead. I'm not going to limit you to either one. And this is the thing that a lot of the narrative I keep kind of getting from the people who speak against women is that they're afraid that somehow women being in the game is going to girlify things or nullify things. We're farther from it. We just want to have the options. We want to be able to play Call of Duty, in which the option of the game is to try to avoid and capture the bad guys, or maybe broker a piece, or better yet, pull up a couple of guns, launch some grenades, and just turn them into small meaty jibs. I mean,
sure,
choices are yours. Granted, of course, some scenarios are the only solution is to blow them up into small BB jibs, but it doesn't have to always be that way.
Right, and it makes it for a fuller world, and it makes the player feel cared about and respected regardless of what their interests are. But I, having been in the industry for long enough, do you remember seeing any sort of shifts in how games were marketed in order to keep them alive? From where I've stood anyway, I've seen the Intellivision Atari 2600 days where you had, like, I can't remember the name of the gentleman, like Robert Attenborough or something, a very high-class, dignified Englishman sitting in front of all this like wood paneling and saying, the Intellivision, the sophisticated gamer system, or whatever, where it was like, this is for the high class, this is upper class, this isn't.
I remember Atari had Alan Alda for a while.
Sure. I read a game review by Dom DeLuise. He reviewed Food Fight in a magazine from the 80s. I found a scan of that. So it was like this mainstream for everybody, but of a certain financial class, certainly. They were keeping that in mind, that most people couldn't afford this stuff. And then there seemed to be this kind of shift away from that to it being for kids. And then a shift away from that to it being for like bad boy kids, for like teenagers who are too grown up for Mario and stuff like that. So we're going to smoke cigarettes and play games about people with big boobs and whatnot.
Well,
This is how you've seen it too.
Yes, I have. Well, also, when you talk about it, I immediately in my mind see a brand name. Because, like, when you talk about the time for the shift to the kids, that was Nintendo. Nintendo does not look at themselves as a video game company. That's one reason why people always underestimate Nintendo. They think Nintendo is this big video game company like PlayStation and Microsoft, Sony and Microsoft. No, they couldn't care less about Sony and Microsoft. They make toys. They've gone public stating they don't make video games. They make toys. And who are toys for? Your kids.
Sure.
So therefore, you've got all these games that are like Mario and the carts and so forth. There's no blood. There's no heck. There was a time during the years of the Super Nintendo out. I did this game called Wolfenstein 3D, and for the Super Nintendo.
You did that for it?
Yep. And there was a time in which we got bumped by Nintendo because the dogs, you had to shoot these dogs. Well, first, we had to change the rats because it wasn't good for you to shoot the dogs. But secondly, there was one frame of animation in which the rat was going to bite you, and you could see the tongue. Now, what color is a tongue?
Pink, red, pinkish.
Bingo. What color is blood?
Red.
We had to change that because they said, oh, it looks like blood.
They thought the tongue was too blood colored. And
exactly, because kids are going to play this game, and we didn't want to show them blood. But that was the impression that Nintendo wanted to give out. And then, of course, when Sony came out, they had their own kids' lines of games and stuff, like Crash Bandicoot. So, but then later on, you had games like Mortal Kombat, who, if you may recall, during the Super Nintendo years, Mortal Kombat came out on the Super Nintendo. They had to take out all the blood.
Yeah,
every bit of blood. All the blood. But when it got released on the Sega Genesis, Sega said, more is better.
Right.
And as a result, the sales of Mortal Kombat was like 5 times more on the Genesis. In fact, people were buying Genesises solely to play Mortal Kombat because they wanted the blood.
Yeah, they did. They did. And they wanted to prove that their hobby wasn't just for kids. And you've come from this, you've had this experience where you were there before it was just for kids. And then you were there when Nintendo, after the crash, kind of shifted the perception of video games. So they were seen as toys and therefore seen as something worth buying. They even packed in a toy robot with their launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System.
That's right, I remember that. Yeah, the robot thing.
So it would be sold in the toy section of stores that no longer wanted to carry video games. So were you there like shaking your head saying, no, video games have always been for adults and have always been for everybody? And how is it that now we're looking at them as either for kids or for like bad boys who just have blood and guts? But there was still no, I think Mortal Kombat has one woman character in it, and she's like the one who bends around the most and is wearing the least clothes. It was still far from inclusive to women in a 50-50 ratio by that time, and still hasn't gotten there now. But yeah, but how has that been for you to witness?
It really just tells me, oh, that game was made by all men. There was no women on that team. Because the bigger the boobs, the less the clothes the character is wearing, the more likely that there's no women on that team. Like nothing makes me giggle more than seeing like an adventures game, a fantasy game in which the woman is wearing this chainmail bikini and she's supposedly armor class, negative sex. And I'm like, so what is it? The breastplate on her, the bikini top has like this magnet so that all the arrows only hit there and not her bare skin. I mean, yeah, right. And also, I've seen chainmail bikinis, and pale one up against my skin and go like, there's no fucking way you can wear this for more than 5 minutes without having it rip your skin apart.
Of course. The counter argument that I'm sure you've heard is people say, "Oh, but it's not supposed to be realistic. There's orcs and elves and whatnot." But of course, you need to work even harder at realism in terms of your systems, in terms of your characters, in terms of your writing, in terms of your character design, in order to make those other elements believable. You need to suspend disbelief by cutting out the chainmail bikinis, which for a guy, it's all just fantasy anyway. Like they're not wearing chainmail bikinis, so for them it doesn't break immersion. But for a woman, you picture her running around in that thing, and you already can't believe the game.
Yeah, well, at the same time, it's also one where that for a man's point of view, they like to see women. Men tend to be heterosexual. Now, if it's a homosexual man, it's a different story. But we're just going to stick with heterosexuals here.
Sure.
Heterosexual men love to see, manly men up there as their avatar because they like to project themselves, saying, "I'm this manly man in this adventure," and they like to be surrounded by scantily clad women. That's a very common fantasy.
Sure.
Now, as a woman, I go up there and I would like to see a strong woman wearing sensible clothes because I want to be sensibly dressed. But I wouldn't mind if I was heterosexual to see a bunch of scantily clad men running around.
I wonder how that game would sell. The closest
is that the game can't sell if it's one or the other. It has to have. You could select either. You see, it's back to inclusion. Never ever force the choice on people. If the game is going to have burly man, scantily clad women, it should also have reasonably dressed woman, scantily clad men. Because the heterosexual woman is going to want to run around with her harem of men as, saying like, "Okay, minions, get them." Because that's what a heterosexual woman would kind of want.
Sure. And likewise, a homosexual man may want to be a sensibly dressed man with a bunch of sexy oiled up hunks around them.
Yes, exactly. See, that's the thing. If you don't limit it, then you get everybody, and they're all going to send you. Everybody's money is green. The woman's money is green. The homosexual men's green. The homosexual's men's green. They're all green. And you know what? I need to pay my fucking rent. So, give me some of that green.
Well, from what I've read, there is this business strategy. Like, I don't think the upper managers at these AAA companies are thinking, well, we're sexist and we don't want women's money. Maybe they are, but I think that, like you're saying, they want everybody's money. But they found that if they convince part of their audience that they are more manly, that they are more alpha males, even though they're participating in this activity, this hobby, which larger culture sees as not being as much of an alpha male as playing basketball or driving a fast car or something. You're staying home playing video games, but they try to convince these guys, you are going to be a better man if you play our game. And they define being a better man by not being for women or not being for kids. So it's like kids and women won't play this game. Like people were saying it quite actively. I think Microsoft might have even come out using coded term hardcore gamer. They would say, well, Nintendo is marketing to like old people and women with the Wii, but we're the opposite of that. We're like the man's man video game system with an X in our name and whatnot. And it worked. And the Xbox sold better because it convinced these guys that they would be like more manly guys, that they would achieve with the gamer score and whatnot in this way to make them feel good about themselves. Finding ways to make people feel good about themselves by playing your game seems to be one of the tricks in order to make money off that game.
There is some truth to what you just said. There is a lot of truth there. But I find that most of the times, like when games are being designed in which there's very little inclusion, it's mostly in the fact that you've got a dev team that's all men, and no one ever sets up and says, hey, why don't we make sure we include women? If no one ever brings up the point, no one's ever going to do it. And it's not until after they ship the game when someone says, hey, why can't I play as a woman? And the team go like, oh, because no one on the team wanted to play as a woman, so we never thought about it. That's where lack of diversity comes in. Because there's been a lot of talk recently about getting diversity into video game teams, in which if the team is composed of all white heterosexual men, of course the game they're going to design is going to be almost exclusively geared to a white heterosexual man. So what, so if a person of color wants to play the game, they're going to see all the selections like white guy, white guy, white guy. I don't see any brown guys. I don't see any black guys. I don't see any Asian.
Yep.
This is, it's still dudes, but, I'm certain people of color are a little bit tired of having to have their avatars being lily white. Now, granted, maybe some people of color like that. I mean, it's back to anybody can like anything else, but it's that nobody of color was on the team to say, hey, you know what? When you say the skin, here's a bunch of colors of skin total: dark, white, normal. Normal being white. That's not normal. That's just a color. And it's not the standard you go by. I mean, that was a big controversy of Crayola a while ago. Decades ago, Crayola had in their package a color called flesh, and it was like a pinkish color.
Yep.
And they eventually turned it into its name to, I think, like a light pink or something, and they don't use the word flesh anymore because you have a dark-skinned child who holds a crayon next to their skin. It's like, my skin isn't this color, maybe in the palm of my hand, but not here.
Right. Yeah, I remember that very well. I think Bloom County even did a funny comic strip about it. I don't know if you remember Bloom County.
Oh, I love Bloom County. It's back on Facebook now. So
is that right? I should check that out. But it was, I can't remember the name of the character, but it was the only...
Milo, Oliver Wendell Jones, the computer hacker.
And he's holding up the... You remember it so well. He's holding up the flesh-colored crayon up against his skin, and he's like, well, I guess I could use burnt umber or something, as close as he could get. And you're so... In a way, I think you're being more generous than I am, despite the fact that you've been in the industry for so long. You would have every reason to be much more bitter than I am. But you're saying it's not so much out of a money-hungering, kind of evil, cynical tact in order to manipulate men into feeling better about themselves by playing games that are like not about women or not about kids. It just may be ignorance that the teams are not diverse enough, so they just don't know that it didn't occur to them that what they're doing might be exclusionary.
I find that the number of teams that actually are in some way actively being misogynistic or racist are very few and far between. They might be like 2 or 3 teams at all.
Sure.
The rest of them are out of ignorance, in which they either are just not aware that they make a game for themselves. And of course, when you make a game for yourselves and you don't actually factor in other cultures, other people, other things, then when the game ships, then people are going to notice the things that are missing. And you're going to sit here and go like, oh, people care about that? Or girls wanted to play my game? Or why would this person like what? But at the same time, now you realize that you've just thrown away these potential sales because the fact you don't have to cater to them. You just have to at least acknowledge that there are people of other views who'd want to play your game. So at least let them have the ability to play it from their point of view. Like in a Call of Duty game, the reason you buy Call of Duty is because you want to blow people up into very small pieces. So the audience already is, these people are not going to want to negotiate. If otherwise they'd be playing a Civilization or something like that. You want to play Call of Duty because you want to go ahead and talk smack and blow shit up. But at least make the avatars male, female, people of color. Now, as I understand it, I haven't played Call of Duty recently, but I believe they fixed that already.
I don't remember them fixing that. They might have, and I missed it.
They might have. I'm not sure because I haven't played Call of Duty in a while. I do know the original version of the Call of Duty was like all white men.
But it was for some time, and there was a lot of talk about why that was, and they held their ground for a while, saying there just isn't the audience for it, and X, Y, or Z. But you don't know until you try, which brings me to this idea I've had floating in my head as you've been talking. You seem ready to do the work to make these games inclusive and to give you were talking before about how you would write concepts and write narrative that never got in the game just because you knew it would make a more fleshed out real world, because you don't see everything that happens in the real world. But
I've already done that. I mean, Bard's Tale 3 of Dragon Wars.
Exactly. And you gave people in Dragon Wars all of those different options in order to move forward. But that was time you could have spent making another game to make more money. But instead, even though people are only going to see one of those options on one playthrough, you gave them that diversity of option in order to make a more inclusive, interesting, real experience. But that's a lot harder, I have to imagine.
Well, it is a lot harder. It takes a lot more planning. But the proof of the pudding here was that I remember a while ago, I can't remember exactly who wrote the reviews, but I remember when Dragon Wars was released, there was 2 reviewers that each played the game and reviewed it and published their reviews. Well, then the 2 reviewers contacted each other and says, like, did you play Dragon Wars from Interplay? And goes like, yeah, because your review is nothing, what you played is nothing like what I played. It's like you played a different game. So it's like, well, I escaped through the front door. And the other guy says, no, I escaped by going through the tunnel that's in the watering well. It's like, there's a tunnel in the watering well? It's like, in the well? It's like, yeah. And they then each played the game the different way. And it's like, oh my God, this game is totally different. And it's like, and then they both went and said, like, this game is amazing.
Yeah.
Because it was like, one person, his play style was large sword, insert into big creature. Repeat until you get to bad guy and take large sword, insert into bad guy. I win the game. Or the other one was like saying, how can I sneak out? And he played the entire game just sneaking around, and he only killed like maybe 5 or 6 creatures in the whole game until he finally got to the bad guy, and then he had to go into fights.
Sure.
Because the end is a fight.
Right.
But he's like, this is totally different. And it's like, it's the same game. And it's like, but that was because when I designed the game, I wanted to make absolutely certain that every single puzzle, there was multiple ways of solving it based on how you approach the problem. If you are Conan the Barbarian, smash door down, loot the place. If you're a thief, sneak in the window, steal the stuff. If you are a paladin or something, go in there, just buy it. But you either all 3 ways will get you the item.
Sure. It doesn't surprise me that Undertale was a little underwhelming to you, because that was its claim to fame. We've got a whole new generation of kids who didn't know that there are games that would give you that many options and not like announce to you, oh, this is the good guy path, this is the bad guy path, this is the pacifist path, this is the genocidal path. That they allowed, Undertale allowed people to discover that on their own. But you've been making games where people can discover that on their own without you telegraphing it for, geez, how many, 20, 30, 25?
35 years.
What? That is...
I started in 1979. This is 2016.
That's weird to me. It seems, and you have so much enthusiasm and energy, and you're so well spoken. How much time do we have? We have 7 minutes left until we get to everything else, because this conversation has just flown by. I want you to be. This is me wanting something because I'm excited about you and I'm excited about the world right now. But you may not want this, so I apologize in advance if this is me having an agenda. But I wish more people knew about you and that you were mentoring and role modeling even more than you are. Because who was it? It was Nina Freeman. She was on the show a while ago. She's now working at Fulbright Company, who's working on Tacoma. She made a game called Sabille about being a woman playing an MMO. So you're playing as a woman who's playing a game. And I was like, have you heard of Rebecca Heineman? And she was like, no, I haven't heard of her. I'm like, she kind of is you in 20 years. She even writes manga. She writes Sailor Renko.
It's actually pronounced manga, and it's Sailor Ronko. Yeah, I speak Japanese, so you gotta say it right. Manga.
Manga, Sailor Ronko. I apologize. I'm a notorious mispronouncer. And
I also did like 9 novels in that series. I mean, full-scale novel. Yeah, go to fanfiction.net and you'll actually read the original novels.
So Nina, growing up, she didn't have. She thought she was the only girl, the only woman who had this like passion for games and manga, and you were there the whole time. I wish she had known about you. Do you think about getting involved in new ways where people could learn from your experience and be taught by you in a more hands-on way?
Well, I go to I have a YouTube channel which I call Burger Time. in which I go there and I do like a 1 hour talk about a specific subject. Like I did one talk about Doom 3DO and the hell that was.
Yeah, I don't know if people know about that. You put out the Doom 3DO source code, is that right?
Yeah, I know. I wrote it.
and it's recently resurfaced due to your work, is that right?
Yeah, Doom 3DO, I found the source code on one of my disks. I was able to reconstruct it all. And then I just said, you know what? Our Data Interactive isn't around anymore, and they're not going to sue me. And I already have permission from Carmack years ago that if I had any of my id software source code, I could open source it.
Oh, cool.
So I said, fuck it. And I just simply went onto GitHub, put it all up there, and got everything, including all the assets and everything. And at that point, I said, okay. And I just told Slashdot saying, hey, Doom source code's up there. If you want to look at it, have fun. Otherwise, I don't care. Next thing I know, it went viral and ended up on things and so forth. And then of course, people started asking me all the questions saying, was Doom really done in 10 weeks? And I was like, look at the source code and ask yourself. Because there were times which I put in a comment saying like, shit, fuck, I can't stand this. I'm tired. like that.
In the source code.
There's like a couple of foul words in there. And it was mostly because, when you're at 3 a.m. and you're trying to fix a bug, only because you only have like, you got 14 days, 13 days to ship date, 10 days to ship date, you get punchy.
Oh, sure you do. Uh-huh. On the 3DO, which was the most powerful home console hardware at the time, if I remember correctly.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't? What was more powerful?
It was definitely hyped up. It had a piece of hardware and it was really awesome, the cell engine. Mm-hmm. The thing that really made the 3DO shine, which is something people aren't really doing today, is audio shaders.
Really?
That was the thing that the 3DO had, which is way ahead of its time. And even to this day, I haven't really seen people do this, is that the cell engine was essentially a 2D graphics processor, very much like the PlayStation 1. Fine and dandy. Mm-hmm. The CPU was an ARM 6 running at 12 megahertz, which at the time was okay. It was good, but not great. But the audio processor in there literally was an APU, an audio processing unit, like we use GPUs. And what you do is you actually write little audio shaders. And the shaders would say, I'm reading 16-bit audio, converted to 16, I'm reading 8-bit sine, 16-bit sine, I'm reading 80 PCM or whatever. And the shaders themselves was doing the decompression and then shoving it into the hardware. And then you could write a shader to do blending and mixing and reverb and so forth. And this is all done in the APU. So you had all these audio effects and they was taking no CPU time whatsoever.
Huh.
And I was like, oh my God, this is so wonderful. Because I wanted to do more. Later on in other games I did for the 3DO, I started taking advantage of writing code in the shaders. But like for Doom, all I did was I just wrote an 80 PCM shader because I needed all the audio files to be as small as possible because I had to fit all that game into a 2 meg memory space.
Whoa. Yeah.
But I had to write a shader.
No. The 3DO Doom, it was a graphics showpiece. It was supposed to look, and it did look better than the PC version. Were all the art assets redrawn? I'm trying to remember.
Okay. Long story short, Art Data was telling the world that this game was going to have new levels, new art, new graphics, new everything. Bullshit. Everything it was telling the world was complete and utter bullshit. Had I not gotten a copy of the source code from John Carmack for the Jaguar version of Doom 3DO would not exist.
Whoa, we have the Jaguar to thank for it.
Yep, because he gave me the Jaguar version with all the levels from the Jaguar version, all the art assets for the Jaguar version, everything. And all I did was take that verbatim, translate it into a format for the 3DO, and that is what the 3DO version was based on.
Huh.
So therefore, if you play the Doom 3DO, the levels and art, everything is the Jaguar version.
Huh. Jaguar. Poor Jaguar. I felt bad for that one. Atari's last chance there at home consoles, at least that I recall. We're almost. Are we out of time? We can't be out of time, but we are. Though I wanted to talk about what you're doing now. We did talk about Sailor Ronco. Did I say it right that time?
Yes, right.
Oh,
What I'm doing now is I'm running a company called Old School. We did a game New and Tasty for Wii U and Vita. We did Battle Chess Game of Kings, which is up on Steam. So it's a remake of Battle Chess. I'm currently wrapping up Bard's Tale Remastered for In Exile. It's a freebie for everybody who pledged for Bard's Tale 4. Then there is a game that we're working on right now. We really can't talk about yet. But of course, one thing I can talk about is that we have been working off and on a new RPG, basically in the same veins as Bard's Tale 3 and Dragon Wars, and we're calling it Shredded Worlds Dragons of the Rip.
Oh, cool.
So it's a part of the Shredded Worlds series of games which we all created. And it's a huge, rich world. Oh my God, the backstory itself, I can easily write like 5 or 6 novels set in it without even trying.
Whoa, awesome. And I didn't realize, so Oddworld New and Tasty you worked on too,
Yes.
with Lorne Lanning.
Yep, with Lorne Lanning.
Lorne, he's another, not quite as experienced as you, but he's been in the industry for a while and has a whole lot to say. He was on the show not that long ago. I think we just ended up having to let him go for 2.5 hours. We literally couldn't stop him if we wanted to. That's awesome. You're doing so much stuff. You're still doing it. You're here.
Yeah.
You're
And what
passionate. Yes, please.
And of course, other things I'm doing is I have my YouTube channel, Burger Time. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook as Burger Becky. You can also, of course, follow my company, Old School, OLDESKUUL, on Twitter. And of course, other things I'm doing is the Sailor Uncle comic. I'm eventually going to restart that again. And the other things I'm doing is, of course, my Burger Lib. It's the libraries I base all my games on. I actually open source that, and it's up on GitHub, so people can get a look at the kind of code that I have been writing for the past 10 years. Now, it's not the source code to a game; it's the source code to the underlying tech that the game's based on.
Sure. Wow. So GitHub, YouTube, video game development, you're all there. And Twitter, everywhere.
Oh,
That
yeah,
is such
Twitter.
a-
I do like a pun or a joke a day. So every day I put up some silly pun and stuff. I'm amazed about how people like. I would have Randy Pitchford saying, "Hey, I just read your joke today." It's like, you follow my Twitter? It's like, yeah,
Yes,
your
Randy.
joke's funny.
Yeah, and you, Randy Pitchford may not be here if it weren't for you. So yes, he should be following you on Twitter. And your Twitter handles, I think you gave them for Old School.
Becky.
And Burger Becky is the personal account for you. As for me, I'm at Tronauts on Twitter. You can watch this show later on youtube.com/SupHolmesShow. You can listen to it on Libsyn and iTunes. And I think that's it. I think we did the show. Thanks, Rebecca.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. I couldn't have had more fun if I tried, and I did try, and I still had so much fun. That almost made sense. Sorry.
For those people listening here, I'm wearing cat ear headphones, so that's one reason he giggles a lot.
Great job, Rebecca. That was so good.